You move $500 into a savings account and close the app before you can second guess it. The number sits there, unremarkable, earning almost nothing, doing nothing visible. You check it the next morning out of habit, the same way you'd check anything new. It's still there. That's the entire point, and it matters more than the amount suggests. It's not about the money. $500 doesn't cover a real emergency. It won't survive a car repair, a medical bill, or a single missed paycheck with much left over. If you measured this moment purely by what it can absorb, it would fail almost every realistic test. And yet something genuinely shifts here, something that has nothing to do with the dollar amount and everything to do with what the dollar amount represents about where you were before it. Before $500, financial anxiety operates differently. Below this number, financial stress isn't episodic, it's ambient. It runs as background noise underneath every daily decision, a low, constant calculation about whether there's enough for the next thing, whether the card will clear, whether a bad week would tip something over. This kind of stress doesn't announce itself as financial stress. It arrives as irritability, as difficulty sleeping, as a specific kind of mental fog that makes it harder to focus on anything else when the undercurrent is running. $500 is the first number that creates actual breathing room, not just a smaller deficit. Below $500, saving money often feels like filling a bucket with a hole in it. Every unexpected expense resets the balance back toward zero before any real accumulation can happen. $500 is the specific point where most people's most common unexpected expenses, a minor car repair, an unexpected utility spike, a small medical copay, can be absorbed without immediately wiping out everything saved. This is less about security and more about the specific psychological relief of having a first, functioning buffer. It rewires how you think about income. Before $500, your paycheck arrives and immediately belongs to obligations, rent, utilities, food, the minimum payments, the things already committed before the money even clears. After $500, something slightly different becomes possible. The paycheck still goes to obligations first, but there's a small, separate pile that doesn't have an obligation attached to it yet. This distinction, money without a predetermined destination, is the first experience of genuine financial discretion most people in this situation have ever had. It builds the container before the wealth. The account, the automation, the habit of not touching it, these infrastructural elements are the actual asset the first $500 builds, more than the $500 itself. Someone with $500 in a savings account they've never dipped into has built something more structurally valuable than someone with the same amount sitting in a checking account that routinely gets spent down to zero. A demonstrated ability to maintain a financial boundary under real daily temptation. You watch it survive something and something recalibrates. Somewhere on the way to or shortly after $500, most people encounter the first real test, an expense that could have justified dipping into it, maybe even should have by any reasonable accounting. The way you handle that test is more financially diagnostic than the balance itself. Every dollar you protect through a genuine temptation becomes evidence, not theory, that you're capable of the behavior that eventually produces real financial stability. It changes the psychology of spending decisions. Below $500, most spending decisions are made from a position of scarcity. The implicit frame is what can I afford in the immediate literal sense of whether the money is present in the account right now. After $500, a slightly different frame becomes possible. Not can I afford this, but should I spend this? A question that implies genuine choice, which implies genuine financial agency, neither of which was available when every dollar was already obligated. It's the specific threshold where financial advice starts becoming applicable. Most mainstream personal finance advice is functionally inaccessible to someone with less than $500 saved, not because the advice is wrong, but because it assumes a level of baseline financial stability that hasn't been established yet. Build an emergency fund presupposes you have a mechanism for accumulating anything. Invest early presupposes you have discretionary income to invest. $500 is approximately the threshold at which the infrastructure for the next piece of advice actually exists to build on. The behavioral shift matters more than the amount. Research on financial behavior consistently shows that the habits and patterns established around small amounts of money tend to scale, both upward and downward, rather than change fundamentally as the amounts grow. Someone who maintains discipline around $500 is more likely to maintain discipline around $5,000, and eventually $50,000, not because the discipline automatically transfers, but because the repeated small-scale practice of maintaining a financial boundary builds exactly the behavioral muscle that larger amounts eventually require. It's harder to go back below zero once you've been above it. There's a documented asymmetry in how people experience financial progress versus financial setback. Losing ground from $500 back to zero feels disproportionately worse than the original journey from zero to $500 felt rewarding. This asymmetry actually works in your favor. The psychological cost of losing the $500 becomes a genuine, felt deterrent against the spending decisions that would cause it, in a way that a purely theoretical commitment to saving never produces. None of this happens the same way with $5,000 as a starting point. A $5,000 first savings deposit, received as a gift or windfall rather than built gradually, produces a completely different psychological experience. The amount is large enough that its presence doesn't require the same ongoing, daily discipline to maintain, and its arrival doesn't include the accumulated behavioral evidence that the slower path naturally generates. The specific lesson that $500 teaches, that you can hold a financial boundary against daily temptation, demonstrated and confirmed, doesn't arrive in a lump sum. It has to be earned through the actual behavior repeatedly at a scale small enough that each individual instance matters. What actually makes this the hardest $100? The first $500 is almost always the hardest money to save, not because $500 is a large amount, but because it's being saved from circumstances where there's often no obvious slack to save from, where the default is for every dollar to already have somewhere to go. This is precisely why the behavioral accomplishment of getting there is disproportionate to the dollar amount. It required building a habit under conditions specifically designed by pre-existing obligations to make that habit fail. It changes the question you ask about your own financial future. Before $500, the question most people in this situation privately ask is some version of, "Is saving even possible for someone in my situation?" A genuine, reasonable doubt driven by actual evidence that every previous savings attempt got reset by an unexpected expense or a tight month. After $500 survives its first real test, the question shifts, not is it possible, but how much more is possible, a fundamentally different frame that opens a different set of decisions. The actual reason it changes everything. Your first $500 changes everything, not because of what it can buy, almost nothing, by most standards, but because of what its presence confirms about your own financial capacity. Before it, the belief that you could build savings was theoretical, untested, possibly false. After it, the belief is demonstrated, tested, and real, in a way that all the financial advice and motivation in the world couldn't produce without the actual behavioral evidence underneath it. Every dollar after the first 500 is easier to protect because the foundational question, whether this is something you're actually capable of, has been answered with evidence rather than intention. This is general reflection on common savings behavior, not personalized financial advice. Everyone's starting point, income, and financial pressures differ significantly. For anyone facing debt alongside savings goals, the right order of operations may differ from what's described here. Consider consulting a nonprofit credit counselor or fee-only financial advisor for guidance tailored to your specific situation. Somewhere right now, someone has $487 saved and is deciding whether to spend it on something that isn't technically an emergency but feels urgent enough to justify. They don't know yet that the decision they make in the next 5 minutes is actually about something much larger than the specific purchase. Neither did you, once.